Gaetz, the Trump loyalist under federal investigation for possible sex trafficking and sex with a 17-year-old. He's also facing a House ethics probe. Gaetz denies all allegations. He's not been charged with anything. But now new private text messages are leaking from someone who has been charged, indicted Gaetz' ally, Joel Greenberg. Politico reporting that 5 days before his indictment, Greenberg was trying to enlist friends in his defense with private messages. They were saying things like, everyone is going to need a lawyer, and noting that he was already paying to retain a lawyer for a woman he knew, who may have been allegedly involved in this somehow, noting the feds, quote, are wanting her to talk. She doesn't want to talk to them. Now, NBC News has not obtained or verified these messages. Politico reports another Greenberg associate was even pushing back on the messages, suggesting that that individual was involved, replying to Greenberg, quote, I have nothing to do with any of this. It is incredibly uncool you're trying to lawyer me up to be a part of it. Not effing cool. And Greenberg also reportedly asking Gaetz to use his influence with Donald Trump to get a pardon, which is striking considering the recent New York Times report that Gaetz was seeking a pardon for himself, at least, from the White House. That pardon didn't materialize. Then President Trump didn't ever pardon his MAGA loyalist. And now his ex-president, there's reports he won't even meet with him. CNN reporting based on two anonymous sources. Gaetz, meanwhile, denies asking for any such meeting. Now, Gaetz built his political brand by going on Fox News more than most Republicans in the country and echoing Donald Trump, an approach that made him famous or infamous, but is no longer yielding public support from Trump, let alone legal help.
After the Russia hoax, the knockoff Ukraine impeachment sequel, and an election that was stolen.
The collusion delusion is over.
The Chinese coronavirus attacked our bodies.
No war against the Chinese virus.
The silent majority is growing louder by the day.
The silent majority is stronger than ever before.
So they ran to the mailbox with millions of ballots.
I think that mail-in voting is a terrible thing.
Because I tell the truth about them.
I'm the president and you're fake news.
Joining me now is Ali Mistal, justice correspondent with The Nation. How are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine. This story continues to drip and drip of leaks and information and text. Here you have what are supposed to be private encrypted WhatsApp text messages, but encryption won't save you if one or the other person on either end starts sharing them, which was what we see happening. Your thought about what window this shows into Gaetz' ally and whether any of this gets closer to Gaetz in the probe?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things going on here. One, Joel Greenberg does not present as the best guy, right? He like if your whole case is gonna rest on this guy, there's some weakness there. He doesn't sound like the most credible person in the universe. He doesn't sound like the most decent person in the universe, and he sounds like a man who is about to go to jail, and knows it and is trying to squirm out. Right? So if your whole case is going to rest on Joel Greenberg's say-so, that's not a strong case. However, as you point out, Ari, and this is something that, I'm not usually in the business of giving advice to criminals, but WhatsApp is not secret. Stop. Just stop. There's no way that you can be alive in 2021 and think that there is something that you can text on that people can't find out. And so if Joel Greenberg has these text messages and if Gaetz is on it, implicated himself, whether it's WhatsApp or Venmo, and we haven't, we don't know what the feds know, but we haven't spoken to the 17-year-old who's now 20, I believe. That person is going to have some information about whether or not Gaetz had sex with a 17-year-old. Once you get into the world of documents, and this is the world that lawyers live in. Once you get into the world of documents, there's either going to be evidence that corroborates whatever Greenberg is singing about, or there's not. If there is, Gaetz has real reason to be concerned.
Well, and as you and I know from the law, the fact that Mr. Greenberg himself wanted to furnish legal assistance to someone else or was telling his associates to get a lawyer, that alone is fine. The fact that some of those people responded, as I said, saying it was, quote, uncool, which is a striking way to respond to the serious felonies at issue here, already suggests that there was already some fissure or breaking between what he thought he was doing and how people were receiving it. To your point about who this person is, and again, for viewers who are saying, okay, well, how much does everyone care about Greenberg? Well, not a ton, other than it's a local case where authorities may seek justice. They've indicted him on serious charges, obviously. But if this is who Matt Gaetz was really linked to by evidence, or spending a lot of time with, or traveling with, or worse, then it matters. You have this Tiger King comparison headline, and this is quite a headline. Like the Tiger King got elected tax collector inside the case that ensnared Matt Gaetz. This reporting that this Greenberg character would strut into work with a pistol on his hip, which happens to be against the state open carry laws of Florida, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to create no-show jobs for a relative and some of his groomsmen. This is the kind of thing that may sound like hijinks, but walk us through, Ellie, at what point any of this stuff involves the misappropriation or misuse of government funds, jobs, etc., that alone creates pressure on him to flip about telling everything he knows about everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of things. First of all, statutory rape is not hijinks, and I know that's kind of news to a lot of Republicans. Like the issue here is not funny. The issue here is not a nothing thing. One of Matt Gaetz's defense that I heard over the weekend was that he's engaged now, but before he was engaged, he didn't live like a monk. This is not a question of living like a monk. This is a question of statutory rape and sex trafficking. That is serious. There is the implication through some of these texts, which again, I have not seen myself. I do not know, disclaimer. But there's the implication that Gaetz perhaps also traded political favors, which would be an abuse of his political office with some of these women, in addition to paying for God knows what school and tuition according to his Venmo, right? So there is put like this. There is nothing not serious about this crime, but about this potential crime, but it goes to a larger issue of permissiveness within this circle. It seems Alexandra Petrie. I know you read Washington Post columnist. I thought she really had the best kind of take on this when she pointed out that this is the kind of thing that should never happen, and only happens in the culture of permissiveness where it's a bunch of frat boys who think that this is part of boys being boys, as opposed to just basic legal standards. You should never be in a situation, and I don't feel there is no kind of, my ears are not burning. There is no skeleton in my closet that makes me worried about saying this. You should never be in a situation where you need to look up the age of consent. Right? That you should just never. You should never be close to that. And asking a congressperson, asking
well, I was just going to say to your earlier point, what we're covering is a federal investigation, and what we know about it is it involves felonies. Some of them involve alleged potential sex trafficking, sex crimes, as well as this election scheme we read about, we covered last week. So all of this is in the ambit of the feds are looking at it because they see serious felonies. There aren't federal investigations for jaywalking or minor local misdemeanors. That's why this is a big story engulfing one of Donald Trump's loudest allies. It's not, as you mentioned, or as he tried to put it, it's not trying to litigate someone's monk or non-monk-like private life. This is a big deal because the feds already indicted one and are looking at others. So I think that's important. I'm supposed to fit in a break. Ellie, always good to have your legal analysis and your straight talk. You with your WhatsApp consumer service information.
I'm just trying to be helpful, man.
Yes, sir. Ellie Massal, always good to see you. I have to fit in a break as I mentioned. Maybe he thought you'd forget. Former House Speaker John Boehner, who went back and forth in the Obama era. A big part of the obstruction, a big part of the partisanship. Well, now he's got a problem with where the Republican Party is, but he's ignoring his role in creating it. And some places are remembering and torching him. Boehner was at it today.
I don't really beat up too many people in this book, except one, Ted Cruz, Lucifer in the flesh.
It's a soundbite. It's one he's used before as he slams these right-wing figures. But Boehner went along for the ride. You have to remember, this was years, long before Trump. He was the House Speaker, so he was the leader of the party. And he engaged with the extreme elements. At times, he didn't like some of the Freedom Caucus and the pushback there, but he found ways to unite and lever with them when he wasn't putting out any coups that might replace his job. He was on the front lines all the way back to the Clinton impeachment. In the book, he now says he was wrong about that too. But what did he do when he had power? We all remember.
I think there's a point here where the American people are wondering, is the president above the law? The president could have put this whole issue behind us, not put the country and the world through this misery, if he'd have just told us the truth in January.
John Boehner wants politicians to tell the truth. But that was him as conference chair, trying to become speaker, using his power to go along with whatever the far right in his party wanted. An impeachment that, whatever some of the possible valid issues, he now says he regrets that he didn't fight against the Republican impeachment of Clinton. Later, Boehner was in for the Tea Party on stage at rallies going hard against Obamacare.
This bill is the greatest threat to freedom that I have seen in the 19 years I've been here in Washington. Join us in defending our freedom. And join us in defeating Pelosi-care.
Are we supposed to take people literally, John Boehner today or then? Because the idea that providing subsidies to the private marketplace for health care coverage is the greatest threat to freedom in his life in the modern era, it's risible. Now, John Boehner, as he tries to sell books and go into this part of his career, calls it, quote, crazy town and the chaos caucus when he refers to the Tea Party, the energy that he was tapping in that backlash to Obamacare. He also was part of the Republican shutdown over that law. He went along with demands that started from people like Ted, quote, Lucifer Cruz. Boehner now says that was another mistake.
Even though I didn't really want to go the direction where the team's going, they were the ones who elected me to be the leader, and I had an obligation to go lead them. So that means I had to go jump out in front of them, even if I thought what they were trying to do really made not a whole lot of sense.
We're joined by Mother Jones Washington Bureau Chief David Corn. He's writing about Boehner's legacy and has plenty to say about it. Welcome to the beat, sir.
Good to be with you, Ari.
Is John Boehner, well, I want to ask you, is John Boehner credible and consistent in his concerns about the partisan and rightward drift of the Republican Party?
Well, not at all. I mean, as you point out, and you could even go further, he basically said okay to let's just start with the Tea Party extremism that hit in 2009. At the rally that you showed him saying this was the greatest threat to freedom, the Obamacare bill, which has not been the greatest threat to freedom. But anyway, that same rally, there were people there who were yelling Nazis, Nazis, in response to what he and other Republicans were saying. They were accusing Obama and other Democrats of being Nazis. This is in 2009. A few months later, at another rally on Capitol Hill, the Tea Party types who were protesting the health care bill, they were spitting at John Lewis and other black members of Congress, and they shouted the N-word at him, and they shouted homophobic slurs at Barney Frank. The Tea Party, according to one poll, 30% of it believed the racist birther conspiracy theory about Obama, and there were members of Boehner's own caucus who were pressing that. He never told them to shut up and get out. When it came to Benghazi, he was the one who let them have 27,000, I think it was maybe only 23, hearings and pushed all sorts of conspiracy theories. So all the extremism that fed into Trumpism and the January 6th insurrection was already bubbling to the fore with the Tea Party and back in the Obama years. And Boehner didn't say one word about it because he very crassly, very cynically, particularly if you read what he says now, tried to exploit the Tea Party and those sentiments, those extremist and violent sentiments, to win a majority in the House. And it worked. And the tiger came in. He tried to ride the tiger. He ended up having to leave to become a lobbyist. But nevertheless, when he had the chance, he never said that any of this was wrong.
So plenty of politicians have their spin and exaggerations and changes of heart over time. But there seems to be a particularly strong trend here of Republicans dealing with where the party is headed, and by many measurements it's obviously more extreme, who then come out and just claim they were never for it. What do you make of that? What does that tell us about the leadership? I mean, Speaker of the House is in the line of the presidency. It's one of the most important jobs. What does it tell you that someone at that high level of the Republican Party, when freed, quote unquote, comes out with all this?
Well, it shows that he's a bit of a coward and not much of a leader. And, you and I don't run for public office. I don't know what it takes to put someone in that position. But I've often wondered, why do you do this if you can't fight for what you believe in? I mean, it's a hard job. I mean, my hat's off to members of Congress, senators. It's a hard job. It's not an easy life. Now, they get paid relatively well. They have lots of perks and respect, and they get to come on shows like this and say what they think. But what's the point of doing that if you can't say what you really think? If you can't really work to put your ideas and principles into power, into policy? And they all claim that's what they're there for. But Boehner and others have shown that when push comes to shove, they're really just there for the power. And he was getting kicked around. I mean, he had the power, but it was not a very pleasant existence. He ran away screaming. So he got kind of the punishment he deserved. Yeah. But he doesn't deserve now to be seen as a wise old statesman who we can sort of look at and say, oh yeah, John Boehner, thank you for speaking out against the authoritarian drift in the Republican Party and the fact that it's been taken over by what you call whack jobs, when you were present at creation for all this. So really, at least acknowledge that and say you made a mistake and that you were wrong about that, and that maybe you should have stood up and said something sooner. Maybe you should have led the fight against the racist birth conspiracy theory, which put Donald Trump into play as a Republican leader.
Right, as you say, and again, there's room for constructive intellectual growth and otherwise. But what he's doing now seems to be such ridiculous revisionism in order to ingratiate himself into whatever he, I guess, thinks now. The only thing it tells you is he thinks that the polite society outside of the House Republican caucus, because he's still hanging out with moderates and Republican circles and business people. It's not as if he's only in Berkeley, where I suspect someone like you might be so at home. Just kidding, David. You could be at home anywhere. But, he's not out on some left coast diatribe. He's still in a moderate to center right place in his life, but he still feels the need to say, I'm not with them. I'm supposed to fit in a break, but I'll let you have a quick riposte since I mentioned Berkeley.
As I said, it's a lovely city, but I think the key thing here is that we know that people even serving now in the House and on the Republican side in the House and the Senate, they often tell people that they can't stand what's happening to their party. The party itself, the people in the party can't stand that Donald Trump is president, and they're scared too about the wackos in the party, and just very few of them seem to have the courage to talk about it or say anything when it matters, when it means putting something on the line.
Exactly.
And that's bad for the party, and it's bad for all of us.
I got to go, but yeah, the proof of them being afraid is how often they talk to journalists, ourselves included, off the record about, oh, this is bad, and you rarely see it out in the light of day. David, thank you as always. We're finishing a break. We have a couple. And we're back with MSNBC analyst Juanita Tolliver. Good to see you.
Hey, Ari.
We've been covering some interesting developments in the Biden administration, including a more liberal start, at least on domestic policy, than many expected. Now, none other than Mitch McConnell's weighing in, and his point actually overlaps slightly with what some progressives and other analysts have said. He says Biden may have won the nomination, but Sanders won the war over what the Democratic Party is these days. And I'll say it, I think Mitch McConnell may be saying this for his own reasons, including trolling, but I think he refers to a true thing, which is that the opening has been pretty liberal on spending, Juanita.
I think the Democrats and the Biden administration are coming out strong on spending because they're meeting a moment in which Americans need help, right? The landscape is changed by this pandemic in an extraordinary way, because let's think back to 2020 when Democrats were absolutely working really hard to not be labeled as socialists or big spenders or big government. But now it's completely fine because it's what is needed in this moment. Long-term investments in the infrastructure, in jobs, and the ability for people to function in our society and in our economy. Because what the pandemic has shown us is that those structures aren't in place. whether that's access to clean water, whether that's securing the electrical grid, or access to broadband, people don't have what they need to function well in our society.
Yeah. And how do you think this affects the Biden administration, if at all, the idea that this Sanders motif is taking home?
I don't think it affects them at all, right? They're going to take all of the provisions that they have strong support from Americans across the country on and relay that message out to the public. We know that 2/3 plus American support most of the provisions included in this plan. And so that's the drumbeat we're going to hear from Democrats. They are completely unbothered by McConnell, as they should be.
Juanita, good to see you as always. Thank you very much. I'm keeping it moving because we have a lot left. President Biden has discussed why some people make a decision to take so many risks and face danger to come across the U.S. southern border. There are nearly 17,000 unaccompanied children now in government custody related to this challenge. MSNBC's Eamon Moilding has headed out to Guatemala to see these issues firsthand and how what comes to the U.S.-Mexico border sometimes comes from very far away. He's live for us tonight from Guatemala City, reporting on all of the complexity on the ground, and he's just interviewed Guatemala's president. Eamon?
Yeah, hey, Ari, you talked about the 17,000 or so children that are in U.S. custody, and it raises a question because a lot of people in the United States are asking, what are the factors that are forcing people to leave places like Guatemala to try and get to the United States? You have to think about this in the dire situation that these folks here are facing. And that's what we've been doing over the past couple of days. We've been going out, not just here in Guatemala City, but also to the rural parts of the country to try and see firsthand for ourselves both the short-term problems as well as the long-term structural problems that are forcing people here. And I can tell you from what I've seen, it is a desperate situation. On one hand, you have the compounded problems as a result of the pandemic, natural disasters, all kinds of economic problems. And, when you compound that with what we've seen in the long run, things like climate change, more importantly, organized crime, corruption in this country, you get a sense that the state is not actually fulfilling its obligation and taking care of the basic needs of the people. And so as a result, people are saying, look, they have to feed their kids, and at the same time, they have to try to survive. And that's why they're taking that perilous journey across Mexico to the United States. I posed this question to the president of Guatemala, Alejandro Giammattei, and I asked him specifically about the Biden policy of accepting children, whether or not that was making the situation more difficult for migrants, or is it incentivizing them to come to the United States? Here's what he said.
I believe in the first few weeks of the Biden administration, messages were confusing. There were compassionate messages that were understood by people in our country, especially the coyotes, to tell families, we'll take the children. The children can go in, and once the children are there, they will call their parents. And so those messages were confusing, not because of the way they were communicated, but because of the way they were translated here.
But obviously, the Biden administration wants to try and solve this problem. They're talking about committing more resources to Guatemala, but there is major concern that the resources will be squandered, like so many other rounds of American assistance and dollars that have been spent here, completely not going to the Guatemalan people, not able to provide basic services, and only ending up in the corrupt system that has allowed it to continue for so many years, Ari.